The autumn evening was settling in as Agent Wilson pulled her dark blue sedan into the brightly lit gas station. The day's work had left her exhausted, but there was still paperwork to review before heading home. She chose a quiet spot away from the pumps, beneath the fluorescent lights, where she could spread out her case files without drawing attention. The small suburban station was mostly empty, with just a few cars getting gas and the occasional customer walking in and out of the convenience store. Through her windshield, she could see the store clerk restocking shelves, and a young couple arguing over which snacks to buy. It was the kind of ordinary scene she'd witnessed countless times during her 12 years with the Bureau. Wilson took a sip from her now-cold coffee and pulled out the manila folder containing her latest case notes. As an FBI agent specializing in white-collar crime, her work wasn't usually dangerous, but it was mentally demanding. Today's investigation had involved tracing complex financial transactions linked to a suspected money laundering operation. She needed to organize her thoughts while they were still fresh. The gentle hum of the car's heater and the rhythmic tapping of her pen against the steering wheel created a peaceful atmosphere. She'd chosen this particular gas station because it was in a quiet neighborhood, away from the busy downtown area where her field office was located. After years on the job, she'd learned to appreciate these moments of solitude where she could focus without interruption. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, asking about Sunday dinner plans. Wilson smiled, thinking about how her family still didn't quite understand what her job entailed. They were proud of her achievements, but they worried too. Being one of the few women of color in her division hadn't been easy, but she'd earned her position through hard work and determination. As she reached for her phone to reply to her mother's message, movement in her side mirror caught her attention. A patrol car had pulled up behind her, its headlights off. She thought nothing of it at first. Police officers often stopped at this station for coffee or a quick break. But something about the way the car was positioned, slightly angled to block her in, made her instincts kick in. Wilson had worked alongside enough local law enforcement to know standard procedure, and this wasn't it. She carefully placed her case files on the passenger seat and adjusted her rear-view mirror to better observe the situation. The patrol car's door opened, and a uniformed officer stepped out, his hand already resting on his belt. Through years of training and experience, she knew to stay calm and alert. She made sure her hands were visible on the steering wheel, a habit ingrained in every federal agent, regardless of their badge or position. The station's security cameras would be recording everything, and she mentally noted the time, 7:42 p.m. In her mind, she ran through proper procedure. Identify yourself clearly, maintain professional composure, de-escalate if necessary. She conducted numerous training sessions for new agents on exactly these scenarios, but experiencing it firsthand was different. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a federal agent, about to face what looked like a textbook case of profiling. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her dashboard as the officer approached. In her mirrors, she could see his confident stride, the kind that came from years of unchecked authority. His flashlight beam swept across her license plate, then her trunk, before settling on her driver's side window. Wilson took a deep breath, keeping her expression neutral despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. She watched him scan the interior of her car, his flashlight beam lingering on the papers scattered across her passenger seat. His body language screamed suspicion, though she'd done nothing to warrant it. Years of similar encounters, both personal and professional, had taught her what was coming next. But this time would be different. This time, she wasn't a helpless civilian being profiled. She was a federal agent about to teach someone a valuable lesson about assumptions and authority. The moment hung in the air like the last quiet second before a storm. Wilson's training, experience, and integrity were about to collide with something far too common and far too wrong in law enforcement. As the officer's knuckles rapped against her window, she knew this encounter would change more than just one night at a gas station. The sharp rap on her window was followed by the blinding beam of a flashlight. Officer Thompson's voice came through, harsh and demanding. "Roll down your window and show me your hands." The command carried none of the professional courtesy typically expected from law enforcement. Wilson pressed the button, lowering her window halfway, enough to communicate but maintaining a safe barrier. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of gasoline and tension. "Good evening, officer," she said calmly, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. "Is there a problem?" The officer's response was immediate and aggressive. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. What are you doing sitting here?" His flashlight beam swept across the interior again, lingering on the papers scattered across her passenger seat. Despite there being no actual reports, he seemed determined to find something wrong. "I'm just reviewing some work documents," Wilson replied evenly, her years of training helping her maintain composure. She could feel her heart beating faster, not from fear, but from a familiar frustration. The gas station's security cameras hummed above, recording everything, a fact she kept firmly in mind. "Sure you are," Thompson scoffed, his disbelief evident in every syllable. "Let me see your license and registration." His free hand rested on his belt, uncomfortably close to his weapon. A clear intimidation tactic that hadn't gone unnoticed by the seasoned federal agent. As Wilson reached slowly toward her glove compartment, Thompson barked, "Keep your hands where I can see them." The contradiction in his demands was glaring. "Which would you like me to do, officer?" she asked calmly. "Keep my hands visible or retrieve my documents." This seemed to anger him further. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, his face reddening under the fluorescent lights. By now, a few customers at the gas pumps had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some had their phones out, recording the interaction. Thompson noticed the observers and called for backup on his radio, claiming he had an uncooperative subject. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Wilson. She'd spent years training other agents about maintaining professionalism, and now she was watching a textbook example of how not to conduct a stop. "Officer," Wilson tried again, her voice steady, "I'm happy to comply with reasonable requests. Would you like to tell me what specific suspicious activity was reported?" She knew there wasn't any. This was nothing more than profiling, plain and simple. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as two more patrol cars pulled into the gas station, their lights painting everything in rotating reds and blues. The situation was escalating unnecessarily, and Wilson could see the store clerk inside nervously watching through the window. Thompson stepped back as his backup arrived, but his posture remained aggressive. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand still hovering near his weapon. The other officers approached cautiously, following his lead without questioning why a woman reviewing paperwork warranted such a response. Wilson took a deep breath, her mind already documenting every detail for the report she knew she'd be filing later. The weight of her FBI badge felt heavy in her jacket pocket, but she waited. Years of experience had taught her the importance of timing. "Officer," she said one more time, "I'd like to know the specific reason for this stop. What law have I broken?" Her question was met with more hostility as Thompson stepped closer to her car door. "I said, step out of the vehicle. Now." The gas station had gone quiet except for the hum of engines and the crackle of police radios. More bystanders had gathered, phones recording what they surely thought would be another viral video of police harassment. They had no idea they were about to witness something very different. What started as a routine evening was about to become a powerful lesson about assumptions, authority, and accountability. As Wilson prepared for what would happen next, she couldn't help but think about how this moment would affect not just Thompson's career, but perhaps the entire department's approach to community policing. The tension in the air could have been cut with a knife as more police cars surrounded Wilson's sit-in. The gas station had become an impromptu stage, with fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on everyone involved. Officer Thompson's face was twisted with barely contained anger his authority being quietly challenged by a woman he wrongly profiled. "Last warning," Thompson growled, his hand now firmly gripping his belt. "Get out of the car, or we'll remove you." The threat hung heavy in the air, but Wilson remained perfectly still, her hand still visible on the steering wheel. She'd seen this scenario play out too many times before, but this time she had the power to turn it into a teaching moment. One of the backup officers, an older man with graying hair, stepped forward. "Is everything okay here, Thompson?" he asked, his tone suggesting he sensed something wasn't quite right about the situation. The veteran cop's eyes scanned the scene, taking in Wilson's professional appearance and the neat stack of papers on her passenger seat. "This subject is being uncooperative," Thompson spat out, his frustration growing with each passing second. The older officer's presence seemed to make him more agitated, as if he felt the need to justify his aggressive approach. Wilson turned her calm gaze to the senior officer. "I've been nothing but cooperative," she stated clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent gas station. "I've asked repeatedly for the specific reason for this stop. No explanation has been provided, and I've been given contradicting commands." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their phones recording every word. A young couple held hands tightly as they watched, while a truck driver who'd stopped for coffee stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head at the scene unfolding before him. "Officer Thompson," Wilson continued, her voice steady and professional, "I understand you're doing your job. However, I need to inform you that this stop appears to be conducted without probable cause or reasonable suspicion. Would you agree?" Her question, posed in perfect law enforcement terminology, caused the senior officer to take a closer look at her. Something in her demeanor and choice of words caught his attention. But Thompson wasn't picking up on these subtle cues. "That's it," Thompson announced, reaching for his car door handle. "We're doing this the hard way." The sound of several sharp intakes of breath from the crowd echoed across the parking lot. The senior officer raised his hand, trying to slow his colleague down, but Thompson was already moving. Wilson knew this was the moment. With deliberate slowness, she reached into her jacket pocket. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "before you proceed, I should identify myself properly." Thompson froze mid-motion as Wilson's hand emerged, holding a black leather wallet. The older officer stepped closer, his experienced eyes already widening in recognition of what was about to be revealed. The crowd of onlookers leaned forward, phones still recording, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Wilson announced, her voice clear and authoritative. She carefully held up her credentials, allowing the gold badge to catch the fluorescent light. "I was reviewing case files when you approached my vehicle without cause." The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson's face went from red to pale in seconds as the implications of his actions began to sink in. The senior officer quickly stepped between them, his expression a mix of concern and professional courtesy. The crowd's hushed whispers turned into a low murmur as they realized what they were witnessing. A woman who'd been subjected to clear profiling had turned out to be one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officers in the country. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Wilson kept her credentials visible as she continued, "I would be happy to speak with your supervising officer about this incident." Her tone was professional, but left no room for argument. The simple act of revealing her badge had completely transformed the power dynamic of the situation, and everyone knew it. The tables had turned, and a routine case of harassment had become something entirely different. A moment that would have lasting implications for everyone involved, especially Officer Thompson, whose career was about to take a very different turn. The other officers arrived within minutes, their patrol cars lining up at the gas station like a row of dominoes. Red and blue lights bounced off the windows of nearby buildings, creating an almost festive atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the serious situation at hand. The senior officer had taken control of the scene, quietly directing the younger officers to move their vehicles back and create some space. Thompson stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely shattered. His hands, which had been so quick to rest on his weapon, now hung limply at his sides as he stared at the FBI credentials still visible in Wilson's hand. "Ma'am," the senior officer addressed Wilson respectfully, "I'm Lieutenant Baker. On behalf of our department, I want to apologize for this unfortunate situation." His tone was professional, but carried a clear note of concern. He knew this incident would have serious repercussions. Wilson nodded, maintaining her composure. "Lieutenant, I appreciate that. I'd like to step out of my vehicle now, with your permission, of course." The subtle emphasis on permission wasn't lost on anyone present. Several of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably, already recognizing this would become a teaching moment in their future training sessions. As Wilson stepped out of her car, her FBI badge now clipped to her belt, the crowd of onlookers had grown even larger. The gas station's night shift worker had come outside, holding his phone up like everyone else. The scene was being documented from every angle, though this wasn't the viral police confrontation video people had expected to capture. "I'll need the badge numbers of all officers present," Wilson stated calmly, pulling out her own notepad. "And I'd like to speak with your chief directly." She paused, looking at each officer in turn. "This isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern that needs to be addressed." Lieutenant Baker was already on his radio, requesting the chief's presence. The other officers stood in a loose circle, their body language showing a mix of embarrassment and uncertainty. Thompson had been quietly moved to the side by one of his colleagues, his face a mask of shock and dawning realization. A young woman from the crowd stepped forward, her phone still recording. "I've got the whole thing on video, ma'am," she offered. "From the moment he first approached your car." Wilson thanked her, taking down her contact information. The witness's hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was firm. She knew she documented something important. The gas station owner had appeared now, offering his security camera footage before anyone even asked. "This happens too often," he said quietly to Wilson, "but nobody ever does anything about it." His words carried the weight of countless similar incidents that had gone unreported or unaddressed. Wilson took a moment to look around the scene. The night air had grown cooler, and steam rose from the coffee cup someone had abandoned on the hood of their car. In the distance, she could hear more sirens, likely the police chief making his way to handle what was quickly becoming a departmental crisis. The senior officer was professionally gathering badge numbers and names, shooting occasional worried glances at Thompson, who had finally begun to grasp the severity of his actions. The other officers maintained their positions, but their earlier aggressive stance had been replaced by something more thoughtful. "You know," Wilson addressed the gathered officers, her voice carrying clearly in the night air, "I train FBI agents on proper procedure and community relations." She paused, letting that sink in. "Perhaps your department would benefit from some additional training as well." The suggestion hung in the air like a promise or a warning. Several officers nodded, while others looked at their feet. They all understood that this night would mark a turning point for the department. What had started as a routine stop based on prejudice had evolved into something far more significant. As more senior officials began arriving at the scene, Wilson stood tall, her FBI badge catching the light of the gas station signs. She knew that tomorrow, this incident would begin making waves through law enforcement circles. But for now, she had work to do, ensuring that this moment of confrontation would lead to real, lasting change. The police chief's arrival was marked by the subtle whoop of a siren, drawing all eyes to his unmarked car as it pulled into the crowded gas station. Chief Richardson was a tall man with broad shoulders and gray temples, and his expression was grave as he took in the scene before him. The crowd of onlookers, the line of patrol cars, and the FBI agent standing calmly at the center of it all. "Special Agent," he said, approaching Wilson with his hand extended. "I came as soon as I heard. His face showed he already knew this was going to be a long night, one that would likely reshape his entire department. The handshake was firm, professional, but his eyes conveyed a deeper concern. Wilson gestured to the security cameras overhead. The entire incident has been recorded, Chief. Not just by these cameras, but by several witnesses as well. She nodded toward the crowd, where at least a dozen phones were still raised. Officer Thompson approached my vehicle without cause, escalated the situation unnecessarily, and made several concerning statements. Thompson stood apart from his fellow officers now, looking smaller than he had earlier. His supervisor had already taken his badge and firearm, standard procedure pending an investigation. The once aggressive officer now couldn't even raise his eyes to meet anyone's gaze. The chief turned to Lieutenant Baker. "I want statements from everyone. Tonight. No one goes home until we have a complete picture of what happened here." His voice was steady but carried an edge of controlled anger. "And get me that security footage." The gas station owner was already hurrying forward with a USB drive. "I downloaded it for you, sir," he said. "Been running the station for 15 years. Seen a lot of things. Never thought I'd see something like this, though." He glanced at Wilson with something like hope in his eyes. A young rookie officer, who couldn't have been on the force more than a few months, stepped forward. "Sir," she addressed both the chief and Wilson, "I'd like to report something else. This isn't the first time I've seen Officer Thompson conduct stops like this." Her voice shook slightly, but she stood her ground. The chief's expression darkened further, but Wilson nodded encouragingly at the young officer. "That's exactly the kind of honesty we need," she said. "Change can't happen if we stay silent." Several other officers shifted uncomfortably, and Wilson knew more stories would come out in the following days. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but those who remained were filming every interaction, every conversation. Social media would be buzzing within hours. The young woman who'd first offered her video footage was already typing rapidly on her phone, likely sharing her account of what she'd witnessed. "Chief," Wilson said, her voice carrying across the now quiet scene, "I'd like to propose something constructive." She pulled out her business card. "The FBI has extensive resources for department-wide training on bias recognition and community relations. Instead of just filing a complaint, I'd like to work with your department on implementing real changes." The chief took her card, turning it over in his hands thoughtfully. "That's more than generous, considering the circumstances," he replied. The other officers had gathered closer to listen, their faces showing a mix of relief and apprehension. Lieutenant Baker was already organizing the witness statements, his notepad filled with names and contact information. The gas station's fluorescent lights continued to hum overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement where just an hour ago, Wilson had simply been reviewing case files. Sometimes, Wilson addressed the gathered officers, the most important lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments. She looked at each face in turn. What matters isn't just what happened tonight, but what happens next. The night air had grown chilly, and in the distance, the sound of traffic continued as usual. But here, in this gas station parking lot, something significant had shifted. A moment of potential tragedy had been transformed into an opportunity for genuine change. As the chief began organizing his officers to take formal statements, Wilson finally allowed herself a small smile. Her evening hadn't gone as planned, but perhaps it had gone exactly as it needed to. Back at the FBI field office the next morning, Wilson sat in the conference room surrounded by senior law enforcement officials. The events from the previous night had moved quickly up the chain of command, and now the room was filled with concerned faces and serious expressions. The local news stations had already picked up the story. On a wall-mounted TV, muted footage from the gas station security cameras played on a loop. The headlines scrolling underneath read, "FBI agent racially profiled by local police." Someone had leaked the cell phone videos too, and they'd gone viral overnight. "This isn't just about one incident," Wilson explained, spreading out her detailed report on the conference table. This is about systemic issues that need addressing. She clicked through a presentation showing similar incidents from the past year alone. The department's statistics painted a troubling picture of biased policing. Chief Richardson sat at the far end of the table, his coffee untouched. He'd aged overnight, the weight of the situation evident in the new lines on his face. Officer Thompson has been suspended pending investigation, he announced. But Agent Wilson is right. We need to look at the bigger picture. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as more officials arrived. Representatives from Internal Affairs sat opposite Wilson, their notebooks open and pens ready. They'd been up all night reviewing Thompson's previous stops, and their findings weren't good. We've uncovered a pattern, the lead investigator said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Officer Thompson has conducted similar stops repeatedly, but most civilians were too intimidated to file formal complaints. The data showed a clear bias in his traffic stops and confrontations. Wilson stood up, walking to the whiteboard. Here's what I propose, she began, picking up a marker. A complete overhaul of the department's training program. Not just a one-time seminar, but ongoing education and monitoring. She started listing points: community engagement, bias recognition, de-escalation techniques. The young rookie officer from the previous night had been asked to attend. She sat nervously in her crisp uniform, but her voice was steady as she shared her observations of similar incidents she'd witnessed. Her courage in speaking up had already inspired others to come forward. The gas station owner sent over years of security footage, Lieutenant Baker reported. He's documented dozens of suspicious stops. We're reviewing them all now. The admission hung heavy in the air. This had been happening right under their noses. Outside the conference room windows, protesters had begun gathering. Their signs called for accountability and change. But unlike many similar protests, this one had a different energy. The presence of an FBI agent who'd experienced profiling firsthand had changed the conversation. We need to be transparent about this, Wilson advised, noting how some officials shifted uncomfortably. The community needs to see that we're taking real action, not just making promises. She pulled up crime statistics, showing how biased policing actually made communities less safe, not more. The police union representative cleared his throat. This is going to mean big changes, he said. Some officers won't like it. Wilson met his gaze steadily. Change is never comfortable, she replied. But it's necessary. Chief Richardson stood up, his decision made. Agent Wilson, we'd like to accept your offer to help reform our department. The room fell silent. And we want to make our process public. Show other departments that this kind of change is possible. As the meeting continued, Wilson glanced at her phone. Messages of support had been pouring in from other law enforcement officers across the country. Many shared similar stories, thanking her for taking a stand. What had started as a frightening confrontation was becoming a catalyst for real change. The young rookie caught Wilson's eye and gave a small nod of thanks. In that moment, Wilson saw the future of law enforcement. Officers who weren't afraid to stand up for what was right, who understood that their badge meant protecting everyone, regardless of how they looked. 1 week after the gas station incident, the police department's largest training room was packed to capacity. Officers from every shift sat shoulder to shoulder, their attention focused on Wilson as she stood at the podium. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. This wasn't just another mandatory training session. I'm not here to shame anyone, Wilson began, clicking to her first slide. I'm here because we all chose this profession to help people, to make our communities safer. She paused, letting her words sink in. But we can't do that if some of our citizens feel threatened by the very people sworn to protect them. In the back of the room, the gas station owner sat next to community leaders who'd been invited to participate. His security footage had revealed 27 similar incidents over the past year alone. Now, he watched with cautious optimism as officers took notes and nodded along with Wilson's presentation. The rookie officer who'd spoken up that night was now helping to facilitate the training. She shared her own experiences of witnessing bias in action, but feeling powerless to stop it. "We need to be brave enough to speak up," she said, her voice stronger now. "Not just for the community, but for each other." Chief Richardson stood up to share the department's new policies. Every officer would wear body cameras. Traffic stop data would be reviewed monthly for patterns of bias. Anonymous reporting systems would be put in place for both citizens and fellow officers to report concerns. "Let me show you something," Wilson said, playing a video clip. It showed a routine traffic stop handled perfectly. The officer was professional, respectful, and clear about the reason for the stop. "This is from Officer Thompson's own body camera 2 years ago. This is what good policing looks like." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew Thompson was now on administrative leave, facing an internal investigation. But Wilson wasn't interested in dwelling on punishment. What changed between then and now? How do we make sure good officers stay good officers? Small group discussions broke out across the room. Veterans shared stories of times they'd caught themselves making assumptions and how they'd corrected their behavior. Younger officers asked questions about handling difficult situations. The conversation was real, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable. On the walls, posters showed the department's new community engagement initiatives. Coffee with Cops would now happen monthly in different neighborhoods. Citizens would be invited to participate in training scenarios. The barrier between police and community would be systematically dismantled. "Yesterday," Wilson shared, "I got a call from a police department in the next state. They want to implement similar changes." She smiled. "What happened at that gas station was difficult for everyone involved. But look what's coming from it." The local news crew, invited to document the training, filmed as officers practiced de-escalation techniques. The reporter noted how different this was from the usual police stories they covered. This wasn't about controversy. It was about progress. During the lunch break, Wilson overheard 2 older officers talking. "Been on the force 20 years, one said. "Never thought about how some more routine procedures might look from the other side." His partner nodded. "Makes you think, doesn't it?" The afternoon session focused on practical scenarios. Officers role-played different situations, with community members providing feedback on how their actions felt from a civilian perspective. The exercises were eye-opening for everyone involved. Near the end of the day, the gas station owner stood up to speak. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was clear. "I've seen a lot of promises of change over the years," he said. "But this feels different. This feels real." As the training session wrapped up, Wilson watched officers lingering to talk, exchange contact information with community members, and make plans for future meetings. The energy in the room wasn't just about following new policies. It was about genuine understanding and change. 3 months after the gas station incident, the changes in the police department were impossible to ignore. The morning briefing room buzzed with activity as officers gathered to review the latest community engagement statistics. The walls, once bare except for wanted posters, now displayed photos from successful community events and thank you letters from local residents. Lieutenant Baker stood at the front of the room, sharing the latest numbers. Traffic stop complaints had dropped by 60%. Community trust ratings were up. More importantly, crime-solving rates had improved because people were more willing to work with the police. "Remember that gas station where it all started?" the lieutenant asked, clicking to a new slide. "They're hosting our next Coffee with Cops event." The image showed the same place where Wilson had been profiled, now transformed into a symbol of positive change. The owner had even installed a new sign, "Community Safe Space." Wilson, visiting to check on the department's progress, sat quietly in the back of the room. She watched as officers shared their recent experiences with the new protocols. One told about stopping himself from making assumptions during a late-night patrol. Another described how the new approach had helped him gather crucial information for a case. The rookie officer who'd spoken up that first night was now leading the department's youth outreach program. Last week, she reported, we had teenagers actually approaching patrol cars, not to cause trouble, but to share information about suspicious activity in their neighborhood. That never happened before. Outside, community members gathered for a Citizen Police Academy class. Through the window, Wilson could see elderly residents chatting comfortably with officers, asking questions and sharing concerns. The barrier of fear and mistrust was slowly but surely breaking down. The Internal Affairs Office, once seen as the enemy, was now viewed as a partner in maintaining high standards. Officers voluntarily reported their concerns, knowing they'd be taken seriously. The anonymous reporting system had revealed and corrected several potential problems before they could escalate. Got something to share, a veteran officer announced, standing up. Yesterday, I pulled over a car for a broken taillight. Found myself reaching for my weapon out of habit. He paused. Then I remembered our training. Approached differently. Turned out to be a single mom who couldn't afford repairs. Instead of a ticket, we connected her with the department's new community assistance program. The story resonated around the room. Similar experiences were becoming more common. Moments where old habits could have led to unnecessary escalation, but new training kicked in instead. The department's motto, protect and serve, had taken on a deeper meaning. Chief Richardson entered the room, holding a newspaper. The headline read, Local Police Department becomes model for reform. Other departments across the state had begun sending officers to observe and learn from their new procedures. What had started as a crisis had become a blueprint for positive change. Wilson stood up to address the room. 3 months ago, I was just another person being profiled at a gas station. Today, I see a department that's truly committed to serving everyone equally. She smiled. But the real test isn't in these statistics. It's in the daily interactions that never make the headlines. The briefing wrapped up as officers prepared to start their shifts. Each one checked their body camera, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. These recordings now served as teaching tools, examples of good policing that could be shared with other departments. As Wilson prepared to leave, she noticed something that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. Officer Thompson's former partner was giving a presentation to new recruits about recognizing and overcoming bias. The message was clear. Anyone could change if they were willing to learn and grow. The morning sun streamed through the windows as officers headed out to their patrol cars. They carried with them not just badges and protocols, but a new understanding of what it meant to truly protect and serve their entire community. 6 months after the incident, Wilson returned to the gas station one quiet evening. The place looked different now, not just because of the fresh paint and new community bulletin board, but because of what it represented. As she pulled into the same spot where everything had started, she couldn't help but smile at how much had changed. The gas station owner rushed out to greet her with a warm handshake. "You should see how different things are now," he said proudly, pointing to a framed newspaper article on the wall. It told the story of how one confrontation had sparked a wave of positive change across multiple police departments. Inside the store, photos covered one wall, pictures from community events, police officers playing basketball with local kids, and town hall meetings where citizens and law enforcement worked together to solve neighborhood problems. The gas station had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of what could happen when people chose to turn a negative situation into positive change. The officers stopped by for coffee every morning now, the owner explained, gesturing to a small seating area he'd added. But not just to keep an eye on things, they actually talk with people, learn their names, hear their concerns. He pointed out a suggestion box mounted near the door, explaining how it helped build trust between the community and police. As they talked, a patrol car pulled into the lot. Wilson recognized the rookie officer who'd had the courage to speak up that first night. Now she was being considered for a promotion to lead the department's expanded community relations unit. She developed a reputation for mentoring new officers and the reformed approach to policing. The department's transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. Complaints about officer conduct had dropped dramatically. More importantly, solve rates for crimes had improved because people felt comfortable coming forward with information. The us versus them mentality was being replaced by a genuine partnership between police and community. Wilson checked her phone, smiling at a text message from Chief Richardson. Their department's success story had caught national attention, and he was being invited to speak at police academies across the country. The gas station incident was now used as a case study in FBI training sessions, showing how a potential crisis could become a catalyst for meaningful reform. Officer Thompson's story had taken an unexpected turn, too. After completing intensive retraining and counseling, he'd requested to share his experience with other departments. His honest acknowledgement of his biases and commitment to change had become a powerful teaching tool. He wasn't back on patrol, but he found a new way to serve, helping other officers recognize and overcome their own prejudices. The young woman who'd recorded the original incident had gone on to create a popular social media channel focused on positive police community interactions. Her followers included both civilians and law enforcement officers, all sharing stories of progress and understanding. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, a group of teenagers stopped by the store. Wilson watched as they chatted comfortably with a patrol officer, sharing jokes and updates about their basketball team. 6 months ago, such a scene would have been unimaginable. "You know what's really different?" the gas station owner said softly, watching the interaction. "It's not just about policies changing. People's hearts are changing." He gestured to a sign above the door that read "Community Strong Together." Wilson pulled out her FBI badge, running her thumb over the surface. That night could have ended so differently, with anger, arrests, and deepened divisions. Instead, it had sparked a transformation that continued to ripple outward, touching more lives and departments with each passing month. As she prepared to leave, Wilson noticed a small plaque near the register. It read, "Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes." Below it was the date of the incident, a date that no longer brought up painful memories, but instead marked the beginning of something remarkable.